Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us in this Q&A with Doug Scott. We're thrilled to have Doug here along with 5 learners from his Philanthropy University course, Organizational Capacity, Assessment to Action. I'd like to say hello and thank you to all of the learners who are tuning in live on our YouTube and Google Plus stream. And if you're watching the Hangout but are not registered for the Organizational Capacity course, you can register now for the next session, which begins on May 24th. We'll also be live tweeting the Hangout from our Twitter account @JoinPhilU using the hashtag #CapacityWithDoug. So please feel free to join the conversation there as well. Before we get started, I'd like to have our learners introduce themselves. So please briefly tell us your name, where in the world you're joining us from, and describe in 1 or 2 sentences why you signed up for the Organizational Capacity course. Alicia, could you go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Rahimthullah. I'm a third-year joint MBA-MPH student at Yale, and I decided I wanted to join this course because I'm originally from East Africa, and my plan is to go back and work in social enterprises when I return. And so I thought this was an amazing way for me to get exposure into the types of things I should be thinking about as I enter the social sector.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. Henry, are you there? Henry, could you unmute yourself? All right, we can come back to Henry. Borbala, would you mind going next? Oh, there he is. Henry?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Henry, and the next name is Kontor. It's spelled Kontor. It means that I was born after 2 daughters. When someone is born after 2 daughters, he's called Kontor. Okay. I'm talking from, that's it. I'm talking from Ghana, and I'm in the central region of Ghana called Kumasi. It is the second largest city in the country, a very historical city. I work at a community sector. We call ourselves Action Research Group. Ultimately, we want to buy into what we call decentralization program of the government, and we try to see how we can build our capacity to vie for contracts in the decentralization program. It's rolling from Ghana, but I think it's going to be African-wide. It's part of the democratization that is happening in Ghana. Okay, that's for now.
Thank you, Henry. And you said that was called Action Research, your organization?
Yes, Action Research Services.
Great, thank you. All right, Borbala, would you go next? Oh, I think you're still on mute.
Yeah. I've just found the button. Hello, everybody. Hello, Mr. Scott. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to be here with everybody, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity. I'm so new in this whole social sector field, so everything that I could learn here already I'm very happy to be able to learn it. And I am originally from Hungary, but just 2 months ago we have moved here with my husband to New York, so that's also very new for me, and I'm so very excited. The reason why I signed up for this organizational capacity course is that I haven't heard about such tool earlier. So, and I was wondering how is it exactly work in a life of a social sector enterprise.
Thank you, Borbala. I see Francisco has joined us. Francisco, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, my name is Francisco. I go by Paco. This is a nickname from Mexico, where I was born. And I work right now in Ohio with the River Network, which is a national group that does conservation for river organizations in the Great Lakes as my region, the Great Lakes of United States. We have an organizational assessment tool and that's why I was interested in this very, very useful course on how to get more effectiveness in terms of return from people filling it out. But in the future, I'm thinking of using the OCAT for our own organization. So I led one of the groups in terms of our homeworks, and we had a great time, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Paco. And then Laritza and Pedro are here from the same organization. Laritza, would you mind introducing yourself first?
Yeah, my name is Larissa. I am from Mexico City. However, I was living in Houston, Texas since last November. I came with my husband because he was relocated, and I have been involved in nonprofit organizations and social responsibility area in private corporations around 10 years ago. And now this new experience with Gonzo Soccer, I part of this organization some months ago, and that is why I knew the Philanthropy University and also the OCAT tool. And then we are now in Gonzo Soccer in the process to build capacity and to build all the way in order to improve the organization in all the stuff. Then I thought it was interesting to take this course and to run the OCAT for Gonzo Soccer.
Thank you, Laritza. And Pedro?
Yes, hello, my name is Pedro and I'm located and based in Mexico City. I joined working good with Gonzo Soccer this year. I haven't had any experience in the social sector before, although I know a lot of social topics and I studied a master's in social sciences and I worked 4 years in the Mexican government, doing capacity building but in Mexican government structures. I am very interested in all the information that the OCAT assessment gave us. I think it was a great tool that put us a lot of aspects we need to work on perspective, and I'm looking forward on joining future courses on this philanthropy university. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you all so much for being here. And now I'd like to welcome Doug. Doug, thank you so much for joining us and being available to answer these questions about the OCAT. Could you tell us, especially for those who are watching who haven't taken your course yet, tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about the OCAT?
Yeah, no, for sure. And can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So, I mean, the OCAT is such an exciting thing for me because I think it brings together a number of passions that I've had in my life. So I worked at McKinsey for a couple years, and then I was in a new startup organization in the United States called the New Teacher Project. And when I was there, there were about 10 of us. It has since grown into a pretty exciting and a pretty big organization, which I was part of the first 5 years, and gosh, it's been another at least 10 since then. But I often looked back and think, what was it that helped that organization stay good and get bigger and not get stuck in a lot of the challenges that a lot of nonprofits are stuck in? And look, running a nonprofit is so hard. You've got funding pressure. You're trying to do good in the world. It's hard to find great people to work with you. And there are often, you know, in a given city, you might have 5 or 6 nonprofits trying to do the same thing. So it is not an easy job, and it's very inspiring to see people that set out on their own or set out with a few colleagues and start an organization or join an existing one and try to make it better. So, you know, so I had that passion for the space and an excitement for the people that are out there fighting the good fight on the front lines. And then I also do a lot of work at McKinsey on organizational change and what it takes to help organizations be effective. And then a lot of my work day to day is with educational organizations. So I'll work with school districts, foundations, philanthropies, some of them big, but a lot of them pretty small. And it just was such a great opportunity when McKinsey said, look, we really want to make this tool available. We want to revamp it from a pretty outdated version. And we want to make it available for everybody to use online for free. which was just so inspiring to me that we'd make that investment, but then that so many people would sort of jump to it and take advantage of it. So really looking forward to the conversation today. I think the course, many of you probably already know this, but what the course tries to do is take this process of, the tool, which is kind of a piece of the course, but really spend a little bit of time talking about why organizational capacity matters. I think, in many cases we get focused on, well, how many people can we help? And of course that's important, but if we neglect the day-to-day capacity of the organization, we can get stuck. We can miss opportunities to make more of a difference in the world. So while it is the sort of behind-the-scenes engine of organizations, at the end of the day, it's what makes the car go. And so a lot of what we talk about in the course is, how do you understand that? How do you think about it? How do you advocate for others in the organization that stepping back and having a conversation about what do we need to be good at, what do we need to shore up, is really important. And the idea for the OCAT is not that the OCAT is going to be a lightning bolt of brilliance of what you should do, but really an opportunity to work with folks in your organization, to ask yourself some tough questions, and then have a conversation about what you can do and how you can take the organization to the next level. So we talk both about building capacity, but then we do spend some time on how do you build a case for taking that step back? How do you run an effective debrief session? How do you actually, get people on task when, the OCAT, for those of you who have taken it, it's kind of long. How do you keep people set on that and get to that outcome? A number of you mentioned the great conversations and the steps forward the OCAT has helped you realize, and I think that's common across a number of the other organizations. But there's always an organization or two who sort of do it, hope they get their scores, and then don't really think about it beyond that. And I think that's such a missed opportunity. So hopefully through the course, we not only talk about the OCAT, but how important it is to step back. And if we're doing our job with the OCAT, then at least it makes it easier, right? It helps you focus, it helps you set some priorities, and then really move forward in the way that makes the most sense for your organization. So it's been a pleasure to be a part of that and to do the online sessions and read assignments, but so great to be talking to you guys live today. So I'll stop talking for now, but really excited to have you again. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Doug. So I think we'll just go ahead and jump right into the questions. Borbala, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. So I have recently joined a very young conversational foundation. We are like a half-year-old. And so from this perspective, my first question is when it is the time when we shall start to take care about our capacity. So are there any symptoms, some typical, let's say, mistakes or happenings which shows that, okay, let's stop now and let's see what we have done and let's see how is our capacity?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think you used the word symptoms, which I really like, because in many ways it connects to kind of a medical analogy, right? So there's a school of thought that says, I should go to the doctor every year just to see how things are going, and then there's other folks who it's more, well, if I'm feeling fine, I'm fine. I'll only go in if something starts to get in the way or starts to feel not quite right. And so I guess I would say, I think long term, something like the OCAT is a healthy thing to do once a year, just as an annual physical, right? To say to the organization, look, we think capacity is important, so we're going to take some time every year. Hopefully the OCAT's kind of, it's a lot of work, but hopefully it's kind of quick to do a bit of a pulse check and say, look, how are we doing? How are we progressing on what we talked about last year? So, I think in an ideal world, there's some sort of annual checkup that I think can be helpful. When you talk about an organization that's as new as yours is, I do think there's a little bit to be said for, gosh, we just have to get our feet under us. And it might be a little early to say we've been at this 6 months and now we're going to step back and see how we're doing. I think, there's that instinct where you should be having that how are we doing conversation often, and I'm sure you are. But whether going to that big, step of everyone spending an hour and a half doing the OCAT, that feels like maybe a little bit more down the road. I would say, if you're feeling pretty good and not, running around in circles in 6 months from now and saying, now's a good time to check in, maybe, or maybe you wait another 6 months beyond that. I wouldn't I wouldn't feel like you got to do it tomorrow, because I think a new organization has a lot to figure out. But if we're having this conversation, a year from now, and you're saying, yeah, we don't have any plans to do it, then I might say, now or 6 months from now, maybe at that 2-year point might be a good one. And look, I think the idea of you doing it, right, of going through it just on your own and seeing what questions it prompts might help you come to a discussion and say, look, guys, I'm not going to have us do this whole thing, but one of the things we haven't talked a lot about is, how we work with volunteers, and that's something that the OCAT asks about. So you can use it to prompt your thinking, but it may be a little early to do the full assessment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks. That's an excellent idea, actually. Thank you.
All right, great. Laritza, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm here. The first question that we have is the results of the OCAT in Gonzo Soccer showed that we need to really work in all different areas that the OCAT measures. And the question is where we have to start, because the main challenge in Gonzo Soccer is that we don't have personnel enough. Then one of the weakness of the organization is that there are not many people to do all tasks, and all stuff, financial and administrative and fundraising are in the same hands, and that's too complicated. Now we are going to start with the strategy planning exercise, but I'm not pretty sure in this situation how to priority is most important.
Yes. Yeah. So, and was there what would the thing you'd say stood out as best for your organization, at least right now?
Right now, the organization is in 3 different countries, United States, Colombia, and Mexico. The problem is that there is not any main office. Just the founder, which is really a football star, and the founder is really important for the organization because she was who created the Gonzo Soccer, and up to now, the founder has been doing all the tasks. And now have just Pedro and I joined some months ago in order to help her to restructure all process and procedures and start planning. And the only personnel the organization is the training personnel, the football soccer coach, which are in charge of the academies. But their main goal of the coach is to provide girls with football training,
Yeah.
Not administrative, not operative stuff. Yeah.
So this is a great question, and in some cases, one of the great things that I like about the OCAT is it's set up to work for organizations of all sizes and ages. But one of the challenges of it is it can be really overwhelming, right? Especially if you're new and you're just trying to get things done, to suddenly say, there's 10 areas and here's all the different things. I think I wouldn't want anyone to get discouraged by how many things there are to worry about, because I think organizations go through growth, and so what I'm hoping that it can do for you guys is set of sort of sequencing, as opposed to feeling like, oh my gosh, we have to get really good at all of this stuff. So if I put myself in your shoes, I guess what I would try to do is step back and say, if I think of like the next couple of years, sort of 2 or 3 sort of chunks of time, what are going to be the most important things? Like, where would you want to be in 2 years from now? And you might say, okay, in 2 years, we've got to make sure that our financials are really strong, that we have a bigger staff, and that we're able to raise more funds. And while I really want to be a learning organization one day, that's not what I'm going to worry about in the next year or 2, right? And then you might say, okay, if we can get that all organized, then we're going to want to get bigger and attract more funders. So by that point, we do want to start thinking about what projects are working and what's not. So that second time horizon might be more about how do we evaluate our programs, how do we focus on adjustments and learning new things. So I guess what I would say, and if there was an answer of here's the right order to do them in, I would give it to you. I think it's very organization specific, but I do think, the reason the pyramid's shaped the way it is that aspiration and strategy, those are at the top. I feel like if it's not clear what you're trying to do and you don't even have a real plan to get there, then it's hard for anything else to sort of come together behind that. But it sounds like you're investing in sort of that strategic planning effort. So for me, it would be aspirations and strategy, and then start to think about, where do you want to be in a year or two, and what does that mean for the things we should prioritize now? And then what's the next couple of waves? Because I think that lets you say, look, we want to be great at all of these things, but we're not going to be great at all of these things tomorrow, especially if we try to be great at all of these things tomorrow. So let's sort of decide what's for now, what's for later, and what may be further down the road. I think the other thing you reference, this idea of a founder doing it all, and then adding just a couple people, I think it does get challenging, because it suddenly becomes the founder could do sort of a certain amount, and then it just sort of multiplies in terms of, well, everybody do everything now. And I do think there's a conversation you might have around these time frames where you could say, look, if we're all on the same page, and you might be wearing 2 or 3 hats, but if everyone agrees of the 2 or 3 things you're doing, we've really got to nail this fundraising thing down, I think that helps you. Just do your day-to-day work and say, look, I could do 4 things right now, but we've all agreed fundraising is most critical. That's where I'm going to spend 60, 70% of my time. I think having that clarity so that you don't feel like you're being asked to do everything, and you don't feel like the organization is saying everything is important, even though it might feel that way. I think a real conversation around, look, when push comes to shove, which are the things I should focus on, which are the things we're focusing on. I think that'll help the organization, and I also think it'll help each of you kind of define the clarity in your roles that helps you really push. Because the hardest thing to do is spin 4 plates really well. If you know you've got to really get 2 things done and the other 2 are medium priority, I think that'll just help all of you.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Alicia, and I know Larissa and Pedro have a couple more questions, but I think we'll come back to you after this round. Alicia, would you mind going next?
Sure. Thank you for that. I think the tool is really exciting. I looked through a lot of the buckets, and it seems very comprehensive. And I like your analogy of actually utilizing medicine to describe, diagnosing on a periodic annual basis. So if we go back to the medicine analogy, you have your annual physical every year, and then every once in a while you check in with different healthcare providers. You go to your pharmacist, you go into other healthcare providers, and you do periodic checks throughout the year. What would you suggest? So 2 questions. The first question is, how do you would you recommend checking periodically, on a 3-month basis, on a 6-month basis, and then, every 3 months, for example? And then the second question is, then once we've done this annual check, are there iterations of the OCAT that you can have in year 2 and year 3 that are different from the initial OCAT assessment that you did in your first year?
Sorry, that you broke up for that last part of that second question.
Sure.
Could you just say that again?
So if we're looking at the lifespan of an organization, and let's say it's 10 years or even longer than that, are there different iterations of the OCAT that you can potentially use at different stages of your organization life cycle?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so let me start with the first one. I do like, people have asked, we're going to do the OCAT and come up with our priorities, and then 3 months later we're going to do it again, or 6 months later we're going to do it again. And I think my reaction to that is that I think that could be too much. And look, I don't know anyone's organization better than they do, so this is just my quick thought. But what I wouldn't want to have happen is people to get fatigued from the OCAT, because it is, you said comprehensive, which is true, and it's a nice way of saying, gosh, it's really darn long, because it is, it is. And I think, we sort of felt, look, if you're going to step back and think about your organization's capacity for a growing nonprofit, it's not too much to ask someone every year to take 60 to 90 minutes and do the OCAT. But I think if it becomes every 3 months, I would understand people saying, come on, how much can this stuff change in 3 months? And this is a lot of time. And then you'll have people saying we're not using it anymore. And I think that's a bigger risk than saying, look, we're going to do it once a year. So I think my advice on this is, like, think about that annual checkup being the more comprehensive one, and certain organizations might even say, look, we're going to make that every 2 years. Everyone has their own thing. I don't think it's a one-time and never use it again kind of tool. But I like your idea, so my other bit of advice to folks is this concept of that checkup. So if coming out of the original conversation, let's say, guys, we really decide that we're going to improve our talent processes or how we hire people, I do think it makes sense after 3 months to say, how are we doing on that? And I think you can do that either just by saying, look, we agreed these were the things we were going to work on. Are we making progress? Or you could even take the questions from the OCAT and put them in a Survey Monkey and send them around and say, hey, guys, we're doing, a 10-question checkup every 3 to 6 months. Now, I'd love to tell you that you could just do that with the OCAT. Right now, the OCAT is kind of one format. You kind of have to do the whole thing. But if you guys decided to pull a couple questions, because those questions are in the reports you get, you could always create like a 10-question internal version as that sort of barometer style checkup. So I love the idea, but I think it's that sense of, like, how often do you do the whole thing, and then how do you do those shorter catch-ups? You asked the question about the iterations and different stages. We didn't build it to say, here's the young organization OCAT and here's the older organization OCAT. We're starting to do some analysis to understand some of those differences, but our hope was to write it so that those very high levels of performance were really set for, like, no matter how long you've been around, those are still a stretch goal in many cases for some organizations. And so, it's punting a little bit, but I think our thought was, let's leave it to the organization to have a conversation that says, look, we're 6 months old. We're fine if we're just good or basic at a lot of things. Here's our strength. And then if a 10-year-old organization got the same results, they should be saying, guys, we've been at this for 10 years. How are we still basic in so many things? So hopefully the organization can kind of filter, like, given what they're trying to do and how long they've been around, what the results mean to them, more so than there being like a different OCAT for different organizations.
Great. Henry, are you there?
Yeah.
Would you like to go next?
I'm here. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I think my question appears to be answered, but let me put it this way. I'm thinking of, how do I make my people own the questions? How do the questions become our questions? That is how I'm trying to look at it. But I think I'm getting through with some of the answers there. So let me ask this. Is there any organization or a person in West Africa who has done the OCAT and then who is using the OCAT report? The reason I'm asking this is that I could probably talk to the person and find out how he banks the report into the cultural context of the people here. Does that make some sense?
It does. It does. And I would suspect there are, just having seen some of the data, that there are groups in East Africa. The only issue is, everyone who takes the OCAT, it's meant to be confidential. So I couldn't tell them, or I couldn't tell you who else has taken it. But I can look in and see if there's someone, and maybe I could email them and say, would you be interested in making a connection? And if they said yes, then go ahead and make that connection. Because I do appreciate, the challenge. The tool was meant to be used generally by organizations all over the world, but when you do that, inherently there are some nuances that it doesn't quite get for lots of places. And so it'd be great if to make that match, and I can look into if there's someone like that could find a connection. And then, Lisa, I don't know if there's anyone sort of via the course that there might be a connection with someone who's done the course, but you may have a better sense for that.
Yeah, I think one idea that I have is to create kind of a separate discussion topic in the course meant for people who've completed the OCAT, are looking forward to next steps and want to connect with people in their region, to find, commonalities in terms of challenges that they faced and how they're going to forge, the path ahead. So that's something that I'll look to creating in the course. Just a reminder that you all still have access to the course environment until I think May 24th. And so this will be a good opportunity for everyone to connect before losing access to that network. And then we also have the Philanthropy University program space, which will be a good place to take the conversation over to. So that's a great idea. All right. Does that sound good, Henry?
Yes, I think that's okay. That's okay. I must say, to me, the OCAT is a very, very good tool. I want to use it very strongly, but I'm trying to find a way to make sure that people don't tell me, hey, this is an American thing that you are drawing upon us. So I'm trying to find how I can indigenize it and make it our own struggle, so that we can own the responsibilities and then share outcomes to build some sort of a base. So thank you. Yes, I enjoy it.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, perfect. Borbala, I know you had a second question. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. In fact, Mr. Scott has just answered my question, because my question was about how often any organization should take the OCAT. And so right now I totally understand that it's very much depends on the type of organization and on many things. So thank you. I have the answer already.
Okay, perfect. All right, Larissa, you had another question about Gonzo Soccer.
Yes. The next question is, okay, I'm going to read it. We know about the weakness in operation and management within our organization. The action plan we expect to implement is in the follow order. First step, we are going to review the theory of change. Next, we are going to develop an strategic planning based on the theory of change. And next, develop policies and operative planning regarding to the strategic planning. And then implement a tracking system to supervise the operative plans fulfillment. In your experience, it is a right order to start working on, or you recommend another way?
Great. Well, again, it's hard to know without knowing the organization, but just going through that list, it does. The first two steps feel very right on to me. I mean, theory of change really gets to, like, what are we trying to do, and are we doing the right things? And so if anyone is saying, like, we should think about that, then you should think about it, right? Because it could change, what you do. You might say we should be, we should change the model, which is going to require new strategies and approaches. So I think revisiting that is a great thing. If there's any question about it, good to revisit it. And look, if all you do is get more sure it's the right theory of change, that's actually not a bad thing, because the more aligned you are to that, the better. And then the strategic plan, I think, makes sense from there, right? You've got what you're trying to do. You can then chart out how you're going to do that. So I think that makes a lot of sense. The question I would have on the policies and planning step, not that it's not the right step, but I might refine it a little bit and sort of call it the high priority policies and planning, meaning you could get mired in policies and planning where someone decides that we should look at all of our policies and how we do everything and all of our processes, and it could sort of distract you from the day-to-day work. So I would say doing that as a third step makes sense, but I think what you then want to say is, for that strategic plan to be successful, what are the 2 or 3 things we have to do really well, as opposed to the list of 20 things that you might have to worry about. I draw on my own experience at the Teacher Project, and I think early on we were pretty good at hiring people, and we were good at picking the right districts to work with. We hadn't yet gotten very good at sharing our expertise with each other, or sharing what we learned externally. But given where we were, I think we said, like, if we get really good at sharing externally before we're hiring the right people, then we're going to miss the boat. Or if we're not getting great results, but we can talk about theoretical issues, people aren't going to listen to us, right? So it became sort of what are the 2 or 3 things that really matter? And that would be my only caution on step 3, is make sure it's not a huge list, but rather the short list of things that you guys think you can make real progress against that are really going to make the biggest difference on the strategic plan. And then the tracking system, I want to say a bit more about that. I mean, in the spirit of, look, let's track, are we making progress against both our goals with people we work with, and then with implementing these improvements in processes. I think that, again, makes sense. But again, I think tracking systems can either be very focused, and I think when you're a smaller organization, like what are the right handful of things to track is a great way to start. Again, there's a risk of someone saying, we could track 25 things. They build this elaborate system, and then you start to get caught up in which of these 25 things really matter. Instead of all saying, we need to track certain things to get better, what is the short list? And so you're hearing this common theme of, making sure you're focused on a narrow enough set of things that in 3-6 months you can say, we really made progress. Because I think you can see a lot of organizations who can list everything that they think a big organization would be good at. They try to do all of it, and then in 6 months they say, gosh, we barely got started on any of it. So that would be my advice. But look, the sequence makes sense. I guess it's more for 3 and 4. How do you focus and prioritize within that sequence?
Okay, thank you.
Great. Paco, I know you have a question. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Doug, again, thank you very much. What we do with River Network is we try to convince several people about the importance of assessing their capacity. So I work with our members. Now I'm trying to work with our own board. But the last case, and I would appreciate any readings or suggestions, is how to make the big pitch to the funders. The funders that, even though we believe, and we've been doing capacity building, any more tools or how we can tell them, yes, invest in us to be able to be doing capacity building.
And so meaning, and don't let me read into this too much, but sometimes funders are very focused on investing to do specific program-related things, like investing in expanding your reach to another water system or something. And is the issue that when you say we want to invest in capacity building, they say, I can't measure that. I really want to focus on program. Like what? Say more about what's holding them back, I guess.
Yeah, most of our funders are like that. That they're what they call shovel-ready projects. So they're like, I'll fund you for a cleanup. I'll fund you to plant 1,000 trees. But if you tell them, what I would really want to do is I want to strengthen the board recruitment practices, or I want to be able to prioritize specific projects or deficiencies, then it, like you say, it's a little bit less tangible.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question, and not an uncommon one. And so let me say a little bit about that, and previewing it by saying I haven't solved this one, but happy to tell you a little bit of my thinking on it. I mean, what's fascinating is one of the things that caused us to redo the OCAT in the version you guys are all using was a big funder saying, look, we're funding all of these advocacy groups, and we have no idea if they're good or if they know what they're doing, and we don't know how to make them better, and they don't know how to talk about if they should get better. And so actually, what happened is we invested with them to develop all those advocacy questions that you see. We did research. We worked with 4 advocacy organizations. We iterated on it, had them kick the tires, etc. But it was precisely for this problem. But this was a funder saying, I want to help them build capacity, but I don't even know how to think about that. So in some ways, the part of the point of the OCAT was to turn it from a group of folks saying, hey, we'd really like to strengthen our board relationships because it kind of feels not so great, to, hey, we want to get better. We stepped back. We looked at everything. We set aside a certain set of priorities. And though we're not trying to get better at everything, but we have picked 2 or 3 things. So I think that there is an argument to be made of, you're not just, sitting in a room for 15 minutes coming up with a thing that kind of feels painful and asking for money. You're saying, look, part of what we do as an organization is figure out the most important things we need to do to get better. And that rigor might inspire some funders to sort of say, hey, this is a different ask than we've seen before. So I think that's one thing. I think there's always a sense of, connecting the priorities to what you think the eventual output for the organization will be, right? So we're building organizational capacity because ultimately, maybe not immediately, but ultimately, it's going to let you do more great projects, have more of an impact. So to the extent to which, that debrief conversation is, what are the 3 things we should build from a capacity perspective that's going to mean we're going to have more impact or twice the impact that we're having or whatever it might be. So then I think there's the angle to funders of, we think as an organization that these 3 things are the things that are most important for us to be twice as big 5 years from now, or whatever that metric is. So I think that can help. And then I think, and this is just, funders are hard to deal with sometimes. Then can you have more of a one-on-one conversation with some of them? Do you decide that you're going to ask, anytime someone puts in $100,000 for a shovel-ready project, that there's an extra 5% that you're going to just sort of add to every grant that you're then going to use for capacity building? It's hard to do that. I think sometimes you'll find kind of a funder who gets it, who says, I'm fine with my funding this year not being about a shovel-ready project. Other times you might want to try to convince all of them to do a little bit more, but then use that money. And the other thing I would say too is, and don't overdo this, but to the extent that the list of things that you guys are trying to work on, if it's 2 or 3 things and they all require a bunch of money, if I'm a funder, I look at it and say, really all the stuff you guys need help on requires money. It'd be really interesting if you said, look, there's 3 things we're going to work on. 2 of them are internal process things that we've committed our time to improving, but we don't need, financial help. The 3rd one, though, actually we do need some financial help, whether it's an outside advisor or a training course or an IT system. And I think from a funder perspective, if they feel like, oh, you guys are building the capacity you really need, and one of them happens to need money, as opposed to, oh, you've got a list of 3 things and all of them are asks for money, and you guys aren't going to, put in effort to build capacity if there's not money for it. So that's a little bit of a political strategy, if you will. But I think that can help. And look, it's one of the challenges. It's been good, I think, as a sector, that we are more and more intent on measuring things and talking about outcomes and talking about results. But it is definitely one of the unintended consequences that funders start to feel like, hey, I want my money to go to that thing that you can tell me, 3 months from now, this lake is cleaner because of my money. I don't want to hear that, our staff is, has, greater skills because of my money, even though, because you can't measure that. And is that really helping? And so it's a tough argument to make. So please take this as trying to be helpful as opposed to thinking I actually can crack this one with you. But hopefully that was a helpful thing.
No, it was useful. I was looking away from the camera because I was taking notes. And we just added the advocacy part to our particular assessment. And we have been funded for capacity building for 10 years, but the main funder is saying, I fund other capacity builders. Why should I fund you? So we're just trying to strategize the same pie for more people, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing about the OCAT, the nice thing is if you do have a funder that kind of gets it, if you do get into this mode of doing it every year, then you can start to have a conversation that says, hey, those things you funded, now we're feeling better about the progress we've made on the capacity in those things. So kind of tracking, it's not perfectly measurable like, adding a new lake or having a certain amount of impact that's shovel ready, but it is more tangible than just, oh, it sounds like we're feeling better about our talent, which is, I think, where a lot of organizations are without a tool like the OCAT.
Thank you.
Great. Alicia, I think you had another question. Did you want to go next?
Sure. So social sector organizations, especially ones in emerging markets, tend to pay lower than the private sector would pay. And so looking at trying to attract and retain key talent from the private sector, do you have any specific suggestions on how to do that?
Yes. I think there are a couple things, and these are based on my experience. I think so. I say that because it's based on my experience with the New Teacher Project and at McKinsey more so than it's based on a wealth of research. But hopefully it's still helpful. I think for me, there are a number, and I think we're all of you guys on the phone would fall into this group of people who say, look, this is what I really want to do. I know I could go make more money doing something else. But what's going to make a difference for me, what's going to make me feel good when I get home at night is that my 8, 10, 14, 16-hour day is on something that I can look back in a few years and say, look, there's something better in the world because of that. Not, look, more people are, buying potato chips, right? And having gone to business school myself, I definitely felt that tension of there are a lot of opportunities to go help more people buy potato chips, and they do pay better than going and starting a nonprofit. So I think that tension is there. So one is finding the people whose values really connect with it. That they just can't imagine themselves doing the private sector thing in some ways. But here's the challenge there. I think what happens though is that gets taken to the extreme sometimes. So it's sort of like, look, it's not about the money. So then it turns into organizations paying way lower. Or not running very effectively. So we've done some research into family foundations, and we did a bunch of interviews. What do they do well? What are they struggling with? And it was really interesting because there were a lot of people at those organizations who said, this should be my dream job, but it isn't. I don't like the people I work with aren't that great, or the dynamics, or the way the org is designed, or what have you. So I think this idea that there's a great number of people that want to get into the social sector space is true, and I think they will do it even if they're not quite paid as much. But a dysfunctional organization, no matter what the mission of that organization is going to drive good people away. So I think one thing is, how can you make that a great place to work? The place I worked, I mentioned the New Teacher Project. There are people that are still there 15, 20 years since I worked there, and I see their posts on Facebook about how much they love who they work with. And there's some sort of magic in that group about the values and the way they work together. And so I think you can retain great people, great people that take a pay cut to do social sector work. If they're having an impact in the world and they love their colleagues and their day-to-day experience, I think they'll never go back. I think the risk is when you bet on, hey, you're doing good in the world, people say, yeah, but there's lots of places to do good in the world. You're not going to keep me here if not only is the pay a little bit lower, but on top of that, the management doesn't work, the organization is dysfunctional. And then back to the pay issue, I do think the social sector is going to be lower pay, but there's a question about how much, right? I think the New Teacher Project early on, and still today, pays, lots of people working there could make more somewhere else. But it's probably 20%, 30% more. It's not 50%, 60% more. And I do think there's something about how much are you just banking on? Look, it's not about the yeah, it's not. But if you're asking someone to make half as much or a third as much as they would somewhere else, that's a lot tougher than saying, look, 20, 25% less. And the organizations I know that do it well then have a great organization and then run with an exciting set of values that, like I said, I think once you're hooked, you stay in. So not an easy thing to solve, but certainly something that I think there are great organizations out there who attract and retain great talent despite that pay difference. But it's really about getting the org to work well, beyond just counting on the mission to make it work.
Great. Pedro, you have a question.
Yes, it's our third question from Gonza Zucker, and it's, in your opinion, Doug, which is the best strategy to involve all people in the organization's building capacity way and avoid opposition?
Mm-hmm. And how big is the organization, or is this just a general question?
It's a general question.
Yeah. So a lot of the work I do with school districts, I think, half the battle is how do you build broader buy-in and how do you avoid some of the challenges. And as easy as as hard as it is, I think the main thing is how do you involve people early and have a genuine interest in their ideas and contributions, right? So there's where this is done not so well is when a small group of people, the leadership team or whoever, gets in a room, comes up with the priorities, and then they kind of go out and talk to other people in the spirit of, like, they call it getting buy-in, but it's a lot more like, here's the answer, we hope you like it, now's your time to say you like it, and if you don't like it, we're going to convince you to like it, and we're not going to change it because this is what the leaders came up with, right? Like that's kind of how it can go wrong. That's not to say you have to go out to the team and say, what do you guys want to do? We have no ideas, but I think there's a balance in between, right? So you could imagine, you know, the OCAT results, if we use the OCAT or some other step back moment, you could imagine doing that and have the leadership kind of form some early ideas, but then have a conversation with a broader group. So you could imagine, you know, sharing the early findings or getting the group together and saying, look, here were the 5 areas that came up as strengths. Here's 5 areas that came up as things to work on. You know, we've sort of highlighted the ones that we prioritized, but let's talk about as a group, like, do these click with you guys? Like, did we miss anything? And then you could imagine saying, look, we agree that, you know, how do we increase our talent is an issue. Why don't, you know, let's have a breakout where 5 of us get into that corner and try to figure out, you know, what are the 5 things we could do in the next 6 months to improve talent. So a good example of this, it wasn't the OCAT, it was a more tailored thing for a foundation client of mine. But what we did was we created a staff survey, and then they present on staff saw the full results, right? It wasn't like, well, sorry, there's some questions you all answered, but we're not going to tell you what you said, right? They shared the full results, they shared their early plan, and then the idea was to say, look, there's 2 or 3 things we're working on, let's get the ideas from the group. And so I think what that does is it sort of shows, on the one hand, a leadership mindset that we are leading. We're not just going to sort of ask everybody, what do you guys want to do, and you know, majority rules, because that's often not the right answer. But at the same time, it wasn't, leadership has come up with a plan, we're going to email it to you, call us if you have any questions, right? It was kind of this middle ground of prompt a good conversation, be transparent with what the issues and challenges are, and then really engage that group. Sometimes it's engaging the group and did we get the sort of priorities right? Sometimes it's what should we do about the priorities? And I think if you frame it as, look, we want your input, we're not saying whatever you say is what we're going to do, but we also really want it, and trust me, you're going to see that input shape how we do things. Because I've also seen organizations that will go out and get this input, but it feels like a show where, you know, they get a bunch of flip charts and great ideas, but then they kind of like, all right, great, thanks for sharing your input. They fold those up, put them away, and don't use them again. And I think following back with the group to say, hey, we heard you, and here's what we've done about it. You know, it takes me back to my business school days. There was a class I took, and a great example of, you know, sort of 2 different ways to run a process. And even if the outcome is the same, the degree to which the process feels engaging and fair makes a big difference to people. So you can imagine landing on the same answer, but if that answer was by 3 people locked in a room deciding the answer versus the group getting engaged in it and coming up with new ideas, one, it's probably a better answer. But even if it isn't, in the latter case, that opposition is way lower because people say, look, we got in the room, we gave our ideas, we heard other ideas, like we get, like at the end of the day, they can't all win, is very different than a group saying, here's what the ideas are, and you never had a chance to contribute. So it won't avoid all opposition, but I think it's a way that people feel like their voices are heard, genuinely heard. And then that translates into people feeling like, look, I can accept the decision and the journey that we all make way better than I can accept, you know, a small handful of people just deciding for the rest of us.
Thank you, Doug.
Great. Well, Doug, I think we're out of time. Pedro, would you mind muting your? There you go. So I wanted to give you a chance to provide any last words of wisdom or closing advice.
Sure. Well, look again, guys. Thank you for grabbing the time, and thanks for the thoughtful questions. I mean, it's fun to see you all digging in, and it's fun. It's always fun to see organizations who are really trying to do good things in the world. And we talk a lot about the tool, but I wouldn't want that to distract from what's the core here, which is, each of you deciding to get out there and to do something awesome. And please know there are, 400 other organizations who've used the OCAT, more so today, a lot of folks involved in the class, and it's really inspiring to me to see everyone out there, and hopefully the tool is helpful. But really appreciate the questions and what you guys do every day. And always excited if you want it, whether it's via the course or via email, other questions or any comments, anything we could do to make the course even more useful to folks, we'd love to hear it. But again, thanks for what you guys do every day, and very excited to join you today.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Doug, on behalf of all of the learners in your course and Philanthropy University. Thanks for joining us and answering these questions. And thanks to Alicia, Pedro, Laritza, Borbala, Paco, and Henry for joining. I also want to remind all those watching that you can sign up now for the next offering of Doug's course, Organizational Capacity, Assessment to Action, which starts May 24th. So thanks again, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.